Hello, hello. So today's subject is not very pleasant. I will warn you, trigger warning. We're going to talk about syphilis, sexual transmitted disease, because it figures very much in, sadly, the histories of women all over the world indeed, but certainly in London on the tours that I talk about. Now, the image behind me is a reconstructed digital image based on a skull found at a particular graveyard that I will be visiting in Southwark called Crossbones Graveyard on our new tour, Sinners, Saints and Saviours. And this particular skull and indeed skeleton became the subject of a history cold case BBC documentary. And, you can YouTube this episode if you like, but I will be talking about it in summary on my tour. That is coming up next month, the new tour. But as you can see, this is actually a skull of a young girl. She was 19 years old when she died. And as you can see, she's got a very syphilitic, diseased face. She's got a very advanced state of syphilis, which would have caused her a lot of agony. This is just her face, but those sores would have been everywhere. And because it was advanced, it would have gone through to her brain and bones. And she basically would have died in a lot of pain indeed. So syphilis emerged in the late 1400s in Europe, and immediately it was linked, of course, with prostitutes and prostitution in general, with fallen women. It was believed to originate in the bodies of women. And this gave rise to the Contagious Diseases Act of the 1860s, which basically gave the authorities carte blanche to regulate and control the bodies of women. Of course, all in the name of, protecting the public from this awful disease. To illustrate this idea, allow me to read to you a quote from a man called William Acton, who wrote a book called Prostitution, Considered in its Moral, Social and Sanitary Aspects, 1857. He says, "The prostitute is a woman with half the woman gone, and that half containing all that elevates her nature, leaving her a mere instrument of impurity, a social pest, carrying contamination and foulness to every quarter to which she has access." That gives you an idea of what the ideas were and attitudes were towards fallen women at the time. So the Contagious Diseases Act was really primarily aimed to protect the army from contracting syphilis. So, police officers were set up in towns where there were army barracks like ports and garrisons, and they were basically contracted to patrol the streets, pick up any woman that was suspected of being a prostitute, and then to persuade her to a voluntary internal exam. Now, I say voluntary because it was billed as voluntary. However, in reality, most of these women picked up were working class or poor or very young, and they were basically coerced into having these internal examinations. And this would be to inspect them internally with a speculum, which of course we still use today, although that indeed in itself, the speculum has a pretty horrible history going back all the way to ancient Greece and Rome. And then in later iterations of this act, indeed, women could be then added to the sort of register of prostitutes or diseased prostitutes that have been found. And then they were subjected to, fortnightly compulsory examinations. So basically, if they were found to have a disease or suspected of having a disease, you've got to remember that medical knowledge about what sexual diseases was quite limited compared to today. They would then be forcibly locked up in a venereal disease hospital, and these were known as lock hospitals, to undergo treatment. Again, treatments for syphilis were very rudimentary until antibiotics were, the revolution in antibiotics happened with penicillin, because we didn't know the cause of syphilis. And so, as some of you may be aware, there were really awful and painful treatments such as mercury used to treat syphilis, which could actually cause more harm than the disease itself, really. Interestingly, French prostitutes actually called the speculum the government's penis. They nicknamed it, and it was used as an instrument of rape by outraged female campaigners, moral campaigners. Because you've got to remember, this was a time where it was believed that, you know, the value of a woman was her purity and her virginity, in fact. And the hymen, there was this belief in what, you know, medical practitioners have largely dismissed now, that the hymen was the indicator of that and that every woman had one. And of course, the speculum could break it. And, you know, therefore, it was seen as outrageous in that respect as well. You know, and also with the Contagious Diseases Act, there was no belief or there was no regard really for men being carriers of the disease. It was basically seen as originating in the bodies of morally bankrupt women. Although this idea was kind of dismissed when it was discovered that, you know, syphilis could be congenital and was being passed to innocent children, you know, that could not be regarded as morally bankrupt. You know, there are lots and lots of images online of babies with congenital syphilis from Victorian medical textbooks, which are really harrowing to look at. And if, of course, a baby had been born to a mother who didn't seem to have symptoms of syphilis overtly, because, of course, it is a latent disease that, once it's far gone enough, it's not going to show up in sores. You know, you're going to have it internally in your body, but maybe affecting your brain or your bones or various things. So then that caused a conundrum for the doctors, who were like, well, hang on a minute, why are these babies being born with syphilis or disease to mothers who seem to be clean? And therefore it was then looked to men. Maybe men could be passing it to their children. So this is where, you know, Harriet Martineau comes in and Florence Nightingale working together for the, I believe it was called the Ladies National Association in the late 1860s. Harriet Martineau was a social reformer, and of course the secretary of this group was the well-known Josephine Butler, and they started campaigning to repeal this act, seeing, it is, very degrading to women, of course, but also the methods to inspect women went against these middle-class ladies' Christian ideas of, protecting women from being violated in this way, and their virginities possibly being lost as well, because these beliefs were still around. Even the suffragettes became involved. Christabel Pankhurst, sort of came on board with this and commented on this. And the idea was to not only protect women, but also to give more accountability to men, quite rightly so. So there behind me is a unbelievable poster from the 20th century, actually. I believe that is a wartime, an American poster. Basically still linking, women prostitutes with syphilis. But here in England, in the 1880s, the act was repealed. But that doesn't mean, of course, that attitudes and beliefs that women were the origin of syphilis didn't linger. As we can see here from this poster from the 1940s in the US. It takes, we all know that laws can be changed overnight, but it takes much longer for ideas about certain things, particularly through the generations, to be cleared. And, we have a legacy of this to this day, really, don't we? We have the idea still, there is stigma attached to prostitutes. There is stigma attached to women who are considered to be of looser morals or maybe have too many partners. There is very derogatory language that we still apply to women who we consider to be maybe dirty sexually, whereas we don't apply that so much to men. Although I do see a little bit of a change in this, thank God. And certainly with regard to the speculum, which is a separate issue altogether, there are efforts to develop a much more women-friendly device. So at least that's getting somewhere as well to change it. But if you want to learn more about this particular subject, I do talk about it on my new tour, Sinners, Saints and Saviours, and I will post the link to book that in the bio below. Thanks so much.